Well, hello and welcome. Thanks again for joining us here today. It's hard to believe it's already December. I wrote on something the other day, 2023. So 2023 is right around the corner for us. But December 15th, 2022 right now. And we've got a great program coming up for you today. My name, of course, is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. The Alliance, of course, is an organization that started about 3.5, almost 4 years ago now, really initially focused on the issue of restraint seclusion happening in schools around the nation. However, over that time, we've kind of grown. We're not only concerned with the use of restraint seclusion, but all the punitive things that are often happening to children and youth in schools and other places, whether it be residential facilities, the troubled teen industry, or other places where, in the name of behavior, a lot of things are being done to people. We are very focused on trying to change policy and law, but we're also very focused on education. How do we get to people better ways of supporting children and youth and really all individuals? How do we move away from kind of the behaviorally driven approaches, rewards and punishment, into approaches that are trauma informed, brain aligned, and better supporting children and youth, and ultimately creating better environments for kids, teachers, staff, and others. So really excited to be here as always. Do want to let you know that we've got a great presentation on board for you today. I've got Robert Beltz joining us for a special presentation. Robert has a lot of experience in the field of education and leadership and has a lot to share with us today. I do want to let you know that, as always, our sessions are recorded. So while this is being broadcast live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, it's also available after the fact on all of those platforms, as well as an audio podcast. So if you're the kind of person that likes to go listen to something later, you'll be able to actually download it on iTunes or Spotify, whatever your favorite platform is, and can listen to it while you're driving, which I've been doing a lot of lately. Do want to let you know we're reaching the end of the year here, and the work of the Alliance, I believe, is really important work. Do want to let you know there are opportunities to donate if you're interested in donating and supporting our work. I'll see if my assistant Courtney, who's working in the background, maybe can put a link up for you. We also have merchandise available as well if you're interested in fact. I'm wearing one of I'm looking at my wrong side here. Cool shirts that we have that are being produced. We have t-shirts and hats and things like that. So at any rate, with all of that, let's get to what you're really here for. Let me go ahead and bring up our guest, Robert, and tell you a little bit about Robert. Hey, Robert. Robert Beltz. Now, I asked you what this acronym meant earlier, and already within that time, I've forgotten, and I know it would. But it says that you are an ACTRP-C. Can you tell me again what that is?
Yes, that stands for Advanced Certified Trauma and Resilience Practitioner, and the C is for the clinical track instead of the educational track.
Fantastic. And of course, you have over 20 years of experience in education and leadership. You are certified in English language development. I'm trying to get my screen here right to work. Trauma and resiliency, equity and inclusion, and applied educational neuroscience. And that was actually how I met you, and we'll talk about that in a second. Your current work focuses on the nature of identity and on the forces that influence neurobiological systems, including identity development. Robert is committed to disrupting systems that harm our students and has shared his work on numerous national conferences. And I actually got to meet you at one of those here not so long ago. Yep. So you and I met, I believe, through Dr. Lori Desautel's, through the program that she has in Applied Educational Neuroscience. And I know I'd presented it at one point to her class, and I think you and I connected at some point then as well. And it was great to meet you. What I found, I probably, like you, am a huge fan of Dr. Desautel's work. And I love the Applied Educational Neuroscience program. We talk about it a lot here. Maybe we can put the link up here for people, but it's a fantastic program that educators and so many others go through to really understand applied neuroscience. How can we take brain science? A lot of our systems and, whether it be educational or otherwise, are really lagging behind in the science. There's a lot of behavioral approaches that really came out in the 1930s and 1950s. And yet we've got this body of work about the brain, about trauma, all of these things out there. And that program really does a fantastic job of bringing that together. One of the things I found, in which you are no exception, the people that I've connected to through that program, the people that have been going through that program, are the most amazing people in the world. And I mean that sincerely. We had another graduate on last time, Angie, who, and of course we had Dustin Springer and a number of folks that have been through that program. But, you know, I don't know if it's the program that draws in that certain type of person. But certainly it's a great program. And I had the opportunity to meet you in Nashville earlier this year at the Trauma Informed Educators Network Conference, and sat through a session that you did. And, you know, the thing that so clearly stuck with me about your presentation, because we were covering a lot of different topics there at the conference, was in fact how regulating you were in taking us through this material, which at times is material that can be, you know, challenging and makes us really think. But you had this calm about you, that I remember commenting to another colleague, Connie, there, and saying, "Oh, you know, I just the way he presents is really amazing." So I appreciate the opportunity to have met you and get to know a little bit about you and your work. And after that, I was like, "Oh, I've got to reach out and see if you might be willing to come here and present." And I'm glad that you agreed to.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel the same way. And, you know, one thing I'll say about the neuroscience program through Butler is it's really grounded in the idea of connections with your students, connections with patients, but really those connections with colleagues within that program. All I can say is that that program is life-changing, and a lot of certificate programs or college degree programs that you go through, you know, you might connect with a person and then after it, you just don't see that person or hear from them ever again. But this is different. This is, you know, the work is important and it's really engaging. And maybe it is because we're like-minded individuals, but those connections are authentic and they're long-lasting.
Absolutely. You know, again, amazing people. Are you going to be in Houston in the beginning of the year at the Attachment Trauma Network conference?
No, sadly not.
Oh, so sad. Yeah, I was hoping you would. I know a lot of the people from that program, and of course, Lori's going to be there as well. If anything changes and you can make it, you know, would love to see you there. But you know, hopefully we'll get a chance to meet in Nashville again, maybe in the summer, I guess.
Yeah.
Great. Well, listen, I don't want to take away any more time from your presentation. You've got a presentation prepared for us. And if you want to go ahead and get that pulled up on your screen and in presentation mode, we can get you moving forward here. And let me just move this out of my way. So you should be able to just shift to your other tab. And you don't have to reshare. It's already there. You just go to your tab.
Okay.
And from your tab. So that's a great thing is I can see your screen while nobody else can. And it looks like you just opened it up. So I'm going to go ahead and put your screen up here. And what I'll let you know and everybody else know is that at this point, Robert can see his screen. He can no longer see me. And of course, he can't see you. So Robert, you're all set. Your first slide is up there. I am going to disappear off into the background. But if you need anything at all, just call and poof, I'll pop up here. But I'll let you take it away. Really excited about your presentation today. And of course, I do want to remind people that we will, of course, as always, we take questions from our audience. And one thing that I haven't said that I almost always say is that if you're on already, let us know who you are and where you're from. It's always fantastic to see where people are joining us from. You can even let us know kind of what you do. Are you a parent? Are you a self-advocate? Are you an educator? Are you an administrator? It's always fun to see who's on. And Robert, I'll mention to you that we get, believe it or not, we get people from all around the world that join us for these programs, and people from Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, Canada, you know, the United States. So hopefully they will prove me right and they will tell us in the comments who they are and where they're from. And after you get done presenting, I'll let you know some of the people that we have on here. But want to let people know, ask your question at any time. We are going to be taking the questions at the end of the presentation. Ireland, look at that. The first person came on and they're from Ireland. There you go. So we will be taking the questions at the end. You're welcome to put them in at any time, but I will be asking you if you have any questions at the end, and we'll have some time set aside for that as well. So Robert, with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, and I will disappear, and it's all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Guy, for that introduction. And thank you, everybody who's able to tune in and listen to this, whether you're listening live or pulling it up after the fact. I appreciate it. Like Guy said, this is the end of the year, and it is the holiday season, and I know a lot of people are busy. So your time is appreciated. I don't take that lightly. Just a couple of learning agreements as we get started. I ask that as you're listening and learning, that you lean in with curiosity and an open heart. Don't pre-assume. Based on what I'm saying, I'm sharing from my own lived experiences, and that's the best that I can do. And sometimes we talk about things that are a little bit uncomfortable, so try to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Now, like Guy said, I have certifications in Applied Educational Neuroscience, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and trauma-informed care. So, and also ESL. I'm an ESL teacher in Novi, Michigan. My expertise is not in seclusion and restraint. And so this has been a learning opportunity for me. And again, just a really rich experience. And I'm learning so much, and I'm eager to contribute to this work. So I will be sharing my expertise today through some anecdotal and theoretical lenses. So also, I don't ever assume to be the best at what I do, but I do aspire to be my personal best. And so your feedback and your questions after are really appreciated. So the presentation today is called Safety, Connection, and Validation, Creating Spaces of Culture and Identity. Like Guy said, my specialty right now, the work and the research that I'm doing is focused around identity. And a lot of that identity is as it applies to English language learners, but also any marginalized students. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So who am I? So if I said, who am I? And I listed professionally, I'm an educator, and personally, I'm a middle-aged male, I'm white or Caucasian, and I'm not Hispanic or Latino. My guess is that you would feel like you still don't really know who I am. And yet these are the questions that we have on applications. These are the questions that we have whenever we fill out a form. This is not identity. This is a very misguided and limited idea of what identity is. So again, those are race, age, gender, and ethnicity. These are things that typically you can see when you meet a person. You already can determine those four things about the person, but we need to strive for a deeper understanding. So James Baldwin, the great James Baldwin, says an identity would seem to be arrived at by the way in which the person faces and uses his experience. Again, this does not tell you anything of my experience, and therefore tells you nothing of my identity. We need to include things like religion, language, ability, socioeconomic status, education. Some of our students have missed education, which impacts their behavior and the way that they regulate. Neurodiversity, sexuality and gender preferences, family dynamics, mental health, lived experiences, and I could make this list go on and on and on. There is this intersectionality of identity, and this is where power is derived from. What does it look like when we talk about identity? What can we do as educators and indeed as adults to affirm identity? How can we help a child further develop their identity? And why do some people say that a person's identity is wrong? For example, our LGBTQ, oh, you know what I'm trying to say. Our LGBTQ community is often told that their identity is wrong. So who am I really? So I'm a 22-year veteran educator, and I currently teach ESL, English as a Second Language students, while working as a trauma practitioner in my district. I'm passionate about issues of equity and inclusion, And in addition to ESL, I have certifications in DEI, trauma-informed practices, and resiliency, and applied educational neuroscience. I can tell you that I very much enjoy writing, speaking, and collaborating with thought partners to promote the ever-changing best practices in education, continuing to develop that craft for all of us. On a personal level, I'm a husband. I'm a father of 2 sons, Brandon and Christopher, ages 26 and 23, and 1 daughter, Samantha, and she's 12. And we also have a family pet, Ringo, our lovable silver lab, and he's 2.5. Together with my family, I enjoy hiking, biking, kayaking, tennis, basically anything outdoors. I love to travel, and I visited Africa 7 times. And each time that I've been there, I've addressed issues of poverty and educational equity and accessibility. This gives you a better idea of who I am as a person. As I said, I have been on this journey, and I've been learning about restraint and seclusion and reflecting about my own experiences with restraint and seclusion as a teacher. This is from the U.S. Department of Education, the Office for Civil Rights. And these statistics are from the 2017-2018 school year. And of the almost 102,000 students who were restrained at school, about 78% of them were students with disabilities. So this shows you that 13% of total student enrollment were students with disabilities, and 87% were all other students. This is the percentage distribution of students who were subjected to physical restraint by disability. 80% of students who were physically restrained were students who had disabilities under IDEA. The disparity is glaring. And the same for seclusion. 77% of students subjected to seclusion were students with disabilities. Again, only 23% of all other students were forcefully secluded, and 77% were our students with disabilities. That's a scary statistic to me. It invokes anger with me. As Guy was talking about the educational neuroscience program through Butler University, like we were saying, it's an excellent program and it is a life-changing program. And the idea of the applied educational neuroscience is built around 4 pillars of our neuroanatomy. It's our educator nervous system. And this is really so important as I'm working with other adults in schools, helping them to understand their own triggers and their own nervous system, because the behavior that we are modeling as adults is exactly what we're going to transfer to our students. It takes a calm adult to calm a child or a teen. Co-regulation is, I sometimes will think of when we teach somebody to drive a car, we don't just give them the keys and say, go for it and see what happens. And yet with behaviors, often in school, we expect our students to be able to regulate their emotions, to regulate their nervous systems without teaching them, without sitting beside them and doing it together, just as we would do math together, just as we read together. We need to teach our students to regulate themselves, but we need to do it first by co-regulating with them so that they understand the process and the tools needed for them to self-regulate. Touch points are those small moments of connection that happen throughout the school day, throughout the week. It doesn't have to be a student in your classroom. I have several students in my school that will come just to see me, just to check in with me at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, just for a smile, just for somebody to say, how was your day? How are you doing today? Those small touch points make all the difference in a student's emotional regulation as they move through their days. And then finally, neuroanatomy, helping our students to understand that when they're having big feelings and when they're having a hard time regulating their behaviors, they're not broken. There's nothing wrong with their brain. They are experiencing something that everybody experiences. And that is basically that your brain is trying to keep you safe in moments of stress or adversity. We need to teach our students that whatever labels have been put on them in the past, that is not who they are. And their brain is really working for them, not against them. That's going to help them understand. And I'll have an example of that a little bit later in this presentation. So I think about education, and we are all, if you are a teacher, social worker, administrator, we're all part of a machine that's been built from the outside in. And in that way, it's been unchanged since at least the 1980s. What do I mean by this? We teach from the outside in. So we look at standards, we look at state and federal funding, we try to determine what resources, what programs we can afford to purchase, and then around that, we start to build a curriculum. But we build it from the outside in. But a truly exceptional educator inspires, and we inspire from the inside out. We can give students compulsory assignments and we can scare them into doing it. We can say things like, for elementary students, which is where I currently work, if you don't do your homework, you're going to be on the wall. And I just, those words are so cringy to me when I hear a teacher say you're on the wall, because it just screams of that school to prison pipeline. We can build students up with these aspirational messages, and we can say, you know, if you do this assignment, you're going to be a rock star. But I don't really know what that means. And you know what? Your kids don't really know what that means either. So maybe you get them to do the assignment, right? But to get them to really learn and to really feel confident and to help them find their why, that takes inspiration. So if you sit with your students, and typically I'll sit with 8 to 12 students at a time. If you sit with your students and you're teaching from the outside in, and you're insisting that your students are compliant, you're going to have an attendance problem. You're going to have an attendance problem. And what's absent isn't a person, it's an ideal. You're going to have the absence of trust. Your students are not going to learn, and the community that you're trying to build is going to collapse in on itself. And we see this happen again and again and again. When a teacher has a student with a behavior problem, the way that they respond just screams, "Save me, I don't know what to do." And that's fair, right? Teachers don't have the training. But when a student is around an adult who believes in them authentically, trust will occur. Trust happens. Now, again, I might not be the best teacher. You know, maybe I am in some smaller circles, but if you were to walk into my classroom on any given day, I guarantee you're going to see trust. You're going to see students who are willing to take chances, and maybe if they're not outspoken and really willing to put themselves out there, at least you're going to see that they have felt safety. They know that they're not in any kind of danger, mental danger, emotional danger when they're sitting with me. You're not going to see those big behaviors on a consistent basis. They do happen, but I've learned to respond in an appropriate way so that students are willing to take risks and to learn. Our students, and this is coming from my lens of trauma, and this is true for only students that have experienced trauma. Our students who have high trauma really have low capacity for the outside noise that's taking place inside the classroom. Students who have experienced little to no trauma, they have high capacity. They're able to adapt, they're able to adjust. So I think about a boy that I had several years ago, and he came to me for ESL, and then he would go back to his regular classroom. And I remember one day he had gotten a haircut the night before, and he wasn't feeling good about the haircut that he got. So he wore a hat. This is a student who had addiction to video games. He had some things going on at home that were not the best for him. He had a lot going on. He was a student with high trauma and low capacity for everything else. He went into his classroom and the teacher said, "Take off your hat." He didn't. He was told again, "Take off your hat," and he didn't. He wasn't being outwardly defiant. He wasn't saying no. He was just simply not doing it. "Take off your hat." And for the third time, he didn't do it. So he was sent to the office. What happened after that? It was unfortunate because it didn't have to happen. He had 2 to 3 adults hovering over him as he was sitting in a low chair. And you can imagine how unsafe he felt having people who are bigger than you closing in on your space. And eventually he just had enough, and he got up and he ran. And when he eloped, he went into a smaller office in the building. And then there were 4, 5, maybe 6 adults who followed him into that room, who blocked him. They secluded him in that room. They would not let him leave. And he had such an emotional reaction to that. This is a student with low capacity. He was in a freeze state. Then he was in a flight state. And after he was secluded, he was pushed into a fight state. And so he started swinging, he started kicking. And that was the first time that I saw a student secluded forcefully in a school. I no longer work at that school, by the way. All of this over a hat. And this is the most infuriating thing for me, is we choose. They say if you're a leader in me school, they say you choose your weather, right? We choose our weather. We choose the way our days are going to go, and we choose our battles. And this student felt so unsafe that he was pushed into a fight, flight, and freeze mode simply because he didn't like the haircut he got the night before. It's unfortunate. This was earlier this year. I think I first saw this maybe in June. This was a Texas school where a young man was thrown into a wall, and you can see what this room looks like. It looks like a dungeon or a prison, thrown in there by an administrator. And you think about identity, and you think, who is this child, right? Who is this child? The reason I went into this work, if I can go on a tangent here, is I had a student who had very traumatic things happen to him. He was one of several siblings who were separated after there was some sexual abuse in the home. He was separated from his siblings. He was in a foster home, and his foster mother was a great lady. This was a student who I had in second grade, and he tended to hoard things just because he didn't know if they were going to be there the next day. And that's what he had learned. That was his learned behavior. This student, I ended up moving to another state at the time. This student ended up moving to another district at the time. And when I came back to Michigan, I was hearing certain circles where this young man was. All of the support, the resource room, the touch points, all of the support that he needed was taken away when he moved schools. When he got to 7th grade, this was 5 years after I had him, he was retained in 7th grade because he wasn't meeting expectations that his peers were making. Mind you, his support was taken away. His academic support, his emotional support. He had no way to really regulate himself. He was still with the same foster mom. He was still carrying all of the abuse and the trauma in his body, right? Just before Halloween, in fact, it was Halloween weekend, I found out that this young man with a brilliant smile, he took his own life because things just got to be too much for him. And that was when I first started learning about trauma, started becoming involved in suicide. I started becoming very interested in how the brain worked and what we can do as educators to make sure that those systems don't fail another student. I learned a lot. I learned, first of all, my administrator asked me when I said, I want to do this extra work. I want to do the suicide prevention program. I want to learn more about trauma. And the response that I got was, is that really an elementary school issue? And the answer is yes, it is. We've had here in Oakland County, Michigan, children as young as 5 have died from suicide. I did the suicide prevention training, and I was talking to some survivors of suicide attempts. And one young girl, she was maybe 21, 22 years old. She was talking about how she survived multiple attempts at suicide. And I talked to her and I said, when did you first start having these feelings that things were not right and you wanted to harm yourself? And she said it was in 2nd grade. She expanded. She explained to me that when she would go to her teacher and she's having these really big feelings and she needed help, she would go to her teacher and her teacher would say, go to the safe spot, the calming corner, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of talk about calming corners and safe spots, and they're great. They're great. But they're only great if it's a choice. If it's mandated, if it's, you're bothering me with your feelings, therefore I'm going to have you go and sit in the corner where I can't see you or hear you anymore. Students know that. And it begs the question, Ronda Rousey, the MMA fighter, I don't watch MMA, but I know her story. She was an undefeated fighter. And she went on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And she admitted that when she lost her fight for the first time, she had to really question, who am I? Who am I? See, when somebody establishes an identity, and in her case, she was an undefeated MMA fighter. When that was no longer her identity, she asked the question, who am I? Now, what does that say for our students who are 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, 13, 14, 15 years old. Students who haven't had a chance to develop an identity in the first place are asking, who am I? Who is that young man? The work that I'm doing in identity is really tied to the brain science, and the neuroscientist in UCLA, Matt Lieberman, has determined different areas of the brain that are salient to the human identity. And it's the medial prefrontal cortex and the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex. And what he's determined is that there are three main constituents to identity: how you view yourself, how others view you, and how you judge or act based on other people's perceptions of you. How does this young man act based on other people's perceptions of him when they're willing to throw him into a dark room against a wall? How does he feel about himself? Who is he? Is he a brother? Is he a son? Does he like to draw? Is he a Cowboys fan? Who am I? And this is the question that so many of our students are asking us when they come through our doors. And yes, we are coming out of 3 years of COVID, which, by the way, the statistics that I showed you were from the 17-18 school year. This is pre-COVID. And I don't know what the numbers, maybe Guy would know, but I don't know what the numbers looked like during COVID, because there were less students in the buildings to be restrained, to be secluded, right? Were these the students that were just not tuning into our Zoom meetings? Possibly, but at least they were safe in most cases. So what we know is that the brain cannot take isolation, restraint, and chronic unpredictability. The brain just cannot process those three things. The brain really craves connection, movement, choice, structure, and routine. And during the last 3 years, all of those, isolation, restraint, chronic unpredictability, all of those were happening for our students at the same time. Now that they're coming back and they're in school and they're in person, our students are in a state of retreat. What are we going to do? I want to get into the heart of my research a little bit here. Chronic stress causes inflammation in the brain. In our brains, we have these cells. They're microglial cells. They're called, affectionately known as, murder cells in the brain. Now, these little cells, they serve a purpose. They eat or they prune away the things that we don't need in our brain. In a healthy brain, this is good. This is what we need. It helps us focus on what's important, and it protects us from becoming overstimulated. So in a sense, these murder cells or microglial cells, they're taking out the trash, right? In an unhealthy brain, or a brain that's been chronically stressed, these cells become out of control and they destroy healthy neurons, right? And that's no longer good. In fact, neurological pruning is a very natural thing, and it's a necessary thing. And this is what it would look like before pruning and after pruning. So if you think about the rapid rate at which an infant learns, up to 5 years, up to 9 years, up to puberty, they take in everything. They learn languages faster. They learn everything faster because there's so much stimulus around, and they're making all these synaptic connections. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see. And if you're a parent, you've seen it in your own kids, right? It's a very natural process for pruning to take place. And when you become an adolescent and you want to get really good at baseball, you want to get really good at playing the piano, maybe you need to be good at algebra. This is where pruning helps. It gets rid of all the extra stuff, takes out the trash, and you're left with what's necessary. Donna Jackson Nakazawa, in her book, Childhood Disruptive, talks about this process a little bit. She talks about two boys, Sam and Joe, I believe she called them, and they both start with a hypothetical number of neurons in their brain. 4,000 was the number. Hypothetical. We know there's many, many, many more. So Sam is subjected to early adversity. Joe is not. Sam has chronic unpredictability. And so from the age of 5, those synapses, those neurons are slowly being pruned away, being eaten away. So by the time Sam reaches the age of 12, he has a hypothetical 1,800 neurons left, right? It's still enough to function. He's okay. Joe, on the other hand, has all 4,000 that he started with because as a young man, he had little adversity. And what happens during adolescence with these hypothetical numbers is during adolescence, when pruning naturally occurs, both boys have another 1,000 neurons pruned away. That means Joe is left with 3,000 and Sam is only left with 800. Now that's not enough. Now Sam is going to struggle with executive function. He's going to struggle with emotional regulation. He might have anxiety, depression, a lot of behavioral concerns. This example that I'm giving, it's true for students with trauma, and it's also true for students who are immigrating from another country. They're taking all of that information that they had to know in their other culture, in their other environment. And when they come to America, there will be a lot of pruning that takes place. A lot of those synapses and neurons are going to be eaten away because they're in a new environment. They don't need to know the old things. They're not using it anymore. So when we are creating these spaces of safety in culture, in connection, in identity, we have to consistently ask ourselves, and this is the educator's awareness of their own nervous system, are we co-escalating with our students or are we co-regulating with our students? It's a choice. It's a choice that all of us have. And I know like things are demanding right now. I know things are hard right now. And I also know that they're a lot harder when we choose to co-escalate instead of co-regulate. This, I can't say it better than this. This was one of the graphics that are available on the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint website. Collaboration over compliance, compassion over consequence, relationships, not rewards, not if you behave, you get a sticker. That doesn't allow for executive functioning. Connection over control, and trust over trauma. We have to start working with our kids, and we have to stop insisting that they're compliant, and we have to start focusing instead on the connection piece. Before I go on to this slide, actually, I'm going to go back a couple here. I had a student last year who, he was new to the country, again, as an ESL teacher. He was having really, really big feelings when he was coming to the school. First of all, the school is big, 600 students in the school. Physical space was just massive, hallways going every which way. He was just completely overstimulated, and he was having anxiety attacks every day to the point where he wasn't coming to school. So here are those touch points. He starts coming to see me. We start, having those touch points before school. How are you doing today? What do you need? One day he was so anxious, he was sick. I sat down with him and he said his heart was racing. Matthew Portell If you don't know him, you should get to know him. He said, one of the greatest tools you can have in your toolbox is a pulse oximeter. So when this student was saying his heart was racing, we put this on him and we put it on his finger, and guess what? His heart was racing. So we started talking, what's going on? What are you feeling? You're not broken. You are not broken. And I know what this boy was thinking. Who am I? That's the question. Who am I? And as we were sitting there and we were talking, I looked at his hands and his hand was trembling. And I pointed it out. I said, look at your hand. You're shaking. And I explained to him, not in terms of neuroscience, they're called neurogenic tremors, but I said, did you know that the reason your hand is shaking is because your brain is so cool, it's protecting you and it's shaking off the stress? And that's exactly what it was doing. He was like, really? And as he was thinking about it, his hand stopped shaking. And his heart rate was going down and his breathing was regulated and he was okay. From that day on, he still had anxiety, but he started understanding that his body was working for him and he was no longer a victim of his anxiety. He was able to work through things. We have to tell our students that they're not broken. When my students come into my room, let me go one more slide here. They will tell you what is happening inside your body and what they're feeling. So this is called interoception. Sometimes it's called the sixth sense. This is an actual bulletin board that I have in my classroom. So my students are anywhere from ages 4, our young kindergartners are 4, and our older fourth graders might be 10, even 11 in some cases. So when they come down, if I say, what are you feeling inside your body? If they're coming in from recess, they might say, I feel shaky. They might say, I feel jumpy. I feel prickly. If they are, feeling something, maybe hanging on to something that happened in the morning in the car, maybe at home, they can tell me if they feel teary, if their body feels heavy, or if they have that knot in their stomach, they'll say they feel tight, swimmy. I have the pictures on there because my students are language learners and they don't always have the vocabulary to explain what's happening inside their body, but they can show the picture. This is what I'm feeling, and they'll point to the frog. This is what I'm feeling, and they'll point to the hedgehog. That's called interoception, and it helps students identify, and what you can name, you can tame. So once they understand that, then we can go into some type of focused attention practice. If most of my students are feeling jumpy or shaky, we'll do something calming. Take 5 minutes at the beginning of class to calm their nervous systems. If they're feeling heavy, if they're feeling tight or closed, then we'll do an energizing focused attention practice, something that's going to energize their nervous system. They can also tell me what they're feeling. So the little spot curriculum for little ones is really powerful because it not only tells I'm feeling confused, or I'm feeling loved, or I'm feeling brave, angry, sad, happy, whatever the feeling is, but it also tells if it's a low energy feeling or a high energy feeling. And again, this drives my practices, it informs my instruction, and it determines what we're going to do that day based on how the students feel. Now, think of this in the context of how I started today. If you are a teacher who's building from the outside in, then you've already determined what the lesson is going to look like, what curriculum you're going to use, what the minute-to-minute rollout of that is going to be. Fair? If you are a teacher who's committed to teaching from the inside out, inspiring, validating, then you're going to say, This is where my students are today, and you're going to meet them where they are. And that is so important, whether you're teaching kindergarten or 12th grade. Understand where your students are. This is from, I love quotes. When SEL is used as another form of policing, this was an article published in 2020. It says we must not lose the importance of co-constructing spaces. Co-constructing spaces with young people, to lean into creative expression and joy, to shift conversations to a healing-centered perspective where young people are reminded that they are not just their trauma, but rather all of the ways that they continue to dream, imagine, hope, and grow. Let them dance, sing, laugh, play, scream, organize, and encourage all of the brilliant ways they show up. Social emotional learning, devoid of culturally affirming practices and understandings, is not social emotional learning at all. This is co-creating those spaces of culture and identity. Affect imagery is another thing that I use in my classroom, and in my craft, my physical space is very, very important to me. The books, the flags that you see on the ceiling, the items that are strategically placed around my classroom. It's done for a purpose. Affect imagery really helps our students feel that they have membership to a group greater than themselves. It promotes safety and familiarity, and it nourishes the nervous system. Now, my examples are specific to my class. I teach ESL, therefore you see the flags from all different countries. You see the Ganesha right here. That is a statue that I have on my shelf. I have sunflowers because I do have some Ukrainian students, and whenever they're emotionally regulated, remember that the language of the survival brain is really sensory. And so when they see sunflowers, when they hear the Ukrainian anthem, whatever emotions they're feeling, they're using their senses to calm their nervous system and move into a more of a learning brain. And then the dragon is for my students that are from China. Now, if you, and I'm assuming that most of you who are tuning in are not ESL teachers as I am. If that's the case, what are the other things that your students could look at that will give them membership to something greater than themselves? Are they Yankee fans? Are they, is there a type of music that they really like? Do they like Mario Kart? I mean, how hard is it to put a picture of Mario on your board so that when students come in, they see something familiar and they can smile and they can identify with it and feel safe? It nourishes the nervous system. Another quote, because I love quotes: there is no better measure of a school's culture than how inclusive it is of our most vulnerable students, our neurodiverse students, our LGBTQ students, our students who have trauma in their past, our students who are language learners. All of our vulnerable, marginalized students need to have those authentic connections with the adults in the building. And that is really the measure of the school's culture. If you're not able or you're not willing to make those connections, I would encourage you to rethink your career, if I'm being blunt. Dr. Lori Desautel, who is, she runs the program at Butler, the Educational Neuroscience program. She's created this great tool for us to use, and it is called Recast. And Recast stands for relationships, emotion, culture, attention, sensation, and tasks. So again, this is a tool that can help you create an understanding with your student to identify what it is that they need from you and to create a culture of belonging rather than a culture and a climate where they don't feel safe. So the relationship piece, who does a student trust? As I said earlier, several students who are not my ESL students know that they can trust me, and they will come at different times throughout the day just to check in. So who is it that provides felt safety for the student? Is it a teacher? Is it a social worker, secretary, custodian? Can be anybody. What are the dominant emotions beneath the behavior? And the feeling board and the interoception board, those can help you identify what those emotions are. Where and when is the behavior occurring? Is it after recess? Is it on the bus? Is it in the lunchroom? What does the student need in that environment to help them? Our goal has to be to help them. Attention, what experiences, things, people, or processes can hold the student's attention? Sensations, what are the sensory needs? Is it something that they can touch? Something that they can smell? These are all grounding things that our students, they need. If they're having separation anxiety from their mom, you can have a cloth that smells like the mom's perfume. Keep that at their desk. When they start having trouble regulating their emotions, they will take that out and they will smell it, and it will make them feel that connection. And finally, what task feels different? What work feels overwhelming? Keeping in mind that, sometimes sitting in a chair is work. Sometimes walking down a hallway quietly, sometimes that's work. And if that feels overwhelming for a student, what can we do? The website at the bottom is Dr. Lori Desautel's website, revelationsineducation.com. Her books are available there. And it is just a treasure box of resources. I really encourage all of you to check that out. Again, revelationsineducation.com. Again, this is a learning process for me, so bear with me, but I was wondering if the work of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, if seclusion and restraint was an American problem, or if my students I have a lot of students from India, I have a lot of students from Japan, so I've been doing research to find out, how widespread is this problem? And what I find is underreporting and misreporting is a problem everywhere. More so in some places than others. And I came across this Indian law, and it's the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act of 2009. And some of the things that it said in the description of this law is that punishment is understood as any action that causes pain, hurt, injury, and discomfort to a child, however light. This includes detention in the classroom, in the library, in the bathroom, or in any closed space in the school. In other words, seclusion is not legal. It is punishable with imprisonment for a term, which may be 6 months, or a fine, or with both. And it went on to say that if physical harm and long-lasting mental injury was caused, that 6-month imprisonment can be extended to 10 years. And then continuing, the Central Board of Secondary Education has issued guidelines to school for ensuring an atmosphere free from fear in each affiliated school. Don't all of our students have a right to go to school free from fear? Now, it also said that seclusion and restraint is still, in fact, corporal punishment in general, it's still accepted in some areas of the country. But, these laws are a first step of moving from training to advocacy. You can't be complacent. these laws are saying that this is not acceptable. So why don't we have these laws federally in the United States? That's where you come in. You can ask Congress to act by contacting your lawmakers to support the Keeping All Students Safe Act. You can share your story. You can donate to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, and just support the mission through social media. You know, if you see something that really speaks to your heart, you know, share it. All of this is available on the endseclusion.org website. It's very important that we get involved, right? Who am I? We have to make sure that this is not happening anymore. In closing, this quote about sunflowers. Sunflowers, as they grow on the plant, they naturally turn toward the sun for light, energy, and growth, much like healthy educators. And when the sky is dark and gloomy, the flowers turn toward each other to conserve energy, to remain protective, and to continue to thrive. Connecting with each other and our teams can help us to continue to flourish during difficult times as well. Okay, thank you. And, I'm looking forward to taking some questions from you.
Robert, I am back, and I appreciate you ending with your contact information there. And I'm going to make your screen disappear in here in a second, and you can come back to the chat. But thank you so much. It's been a fantastic presentation. Already had people that have been commenting. This is such a great presentation. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. Very informative. Thank you. So a lot of thanks here. Let me go ahead and make your slide deck disappear. And now, if you'd like to, you can return back to the tab where you see you and I, and that'll make it a little easier now for us to
got it.
Questions. And in the meantime, want to remind everyone that's watching live, and we've got quite a few people that have been watching and engaging. Want to remind people, if you have questions, to ask those. We already have a few questions that are in the chat, so I'll start with those. But this has been a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate your your take through all of this and your journey and the things that you've been doing. It really gives you, or at least it gives me hope. When I work with educators, like you, like the others that I've met through the Applied Educational Neuroscience, program, it gives you a lot of hope. And I'm sure there are families and parents that are on this today listening who have not been as fortunate to have educators like you doing the work that you're doing. But I just want to thank you for all that you're doing. Really great information here. So let me get a couple of questions here. And Courtney was kind enough to kind of call some of them out to me. I want to start with one from Michelle. And she says, how does restraint and seclusion relate to zero tolerance and other historic racially oppressive systems like segregation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll let you speak to that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, certainly I think there is a strong relationship with kind of the mentality behind zero tolerance policies and restraint and seclusion. What's interesting, though, is I've done some investigation of the data, and the data tells you kind of an interesting story. When zero tolerance policies were really strongly in place, we saw an increase in things like suspensions and expulsions and a lot of punitive consequences. Interestingly enough, in some of the data that I analyzed, as restraint and seclusion went down, as suspension and expulsion went up, and as expulsion and suspension went down, restraint and seclusion went back up. Now, correlation does not mean causation, correct? But it's interesting because what you seem to see is that as kids were being removed from school, there was perhaps less restraint and seclusion, and as kids were being suspended and expelled at a lesser rate, those things went up. Again, correlation is not causation, but it was interesting to see. I think a lot of these things have connection. if you go back to, well, we know what the data says. The data says this is a civil rights issue, both in terms of disability, in terms of Black and brown children more likely to be restrained and secluded. So I think there's a lot that this has in terms of connection with zero tolerance and with things like segregation. Kids that are in more segregated environments. So kids that are in a general education setting with their non-disabled peers are less likely to be restrained and secluded. As you go into more restrictive settings, you find that the use of restraint and seclusion go up. Now, of course, you can imagine the different answers that you might get as to why, but certainly as you begin to segregate kids, there's a stronger likelihood that they will see things like restraint and seclusion.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Michelle. The slides that I showed earlier, just from, my own leaning in with curiosity, wanting to know more about seclusion and restraint, coming across all of the statistics from the U.S. Department of Education, the Civil Rights Office. Those slides that I shared were only a few of many, and there was slides on there that desegregate by race and gender and everything. If you go to that website, all of that is available for you. For me,
we'll put the website up there as well. The OCR data website, it's a great resource. But as you mentioned in your presentation, even the best data we have is not very good because there's a tremendous amount of underreporting.
Yeah. And for me, just having that background in diversity and inclusion, people tend to think of diversity and inclusion as race, but really it's our neurodiverse kids, our LGBTQ community, our kids who have trauma, all of these segregated, marginalized populations. Segregation is occurring. We are singling out these students in these different demographics, and we're treating them differently than we are other students.
Absolutely.
What I'd really like to see, the picture of the Texas administrator throwing the student against the wall, I see that come across social media, and I see all of the little emojis that come up, sad faces, the heart for caring. I want to see people be angry. We have to get angry about these things occurring.
The young man and that you were talking about there, his name is Quentin. I've talked to his mother as well, and not only because this has surprised me as well. Not only do you not see the anger sometimes that you might expect to see, one of the hard lessons that people sometimes learn that have gone through things where their kids have been restrained or secluded is that if their story gets out in the media, you might think that everyone would say, oh my gosh, a disabled child being thrown into a seclusion room, that's awful. But I'll tell you, there's a large percentage of people out there that have very strong opinions, very little information, who say some really horrific things, first about the child, then about the family. And it really is disheartening. That mother in particular, there was a radio show, and basically this radio show was talking about that case. And the hosts were saying, well, I bet, it's the mother's fault. And, there's probably no man in this child's life. And, went on to say all of these things that were really, horrific. And again, it gets to blame the child, blame the parent. So unfortunately, not only are we sometimes lacking anger, I think we have a lot of work to do around educating people about the impact of trauma, about, things that seem like everyone might appreciate, that there's a big gap there. Corporal punishment, we still have 19 states here in 2022 that still allow corporal punishment. There's a mountain of science that shows that this is not something that should be happening. Yet, what do we hear? We hear, well, it happened to me when I was, little, and I turned out fine. There's a lot here that is disappointing in that vein that you bring up about not only are people sometimes not outraged, they're unempathetic and really don't understand what's happening. Yeah, tough times. Michelle asked another question. if it's been determined that seclusion and restraint is an adverse childhood experience, and Michelle, I would say that I have absolutely determined that, but I don't know that all the powers that be would agree with me. But I think there's no question that being physically restrained or put into a seclusion room against your will is an adverse childhood experience. Then you ask, why is it not enough to stop the practice? Robert, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, if we know these things are not only unhealthy but harmful, why do you think they still are happening?
Yeah, I can tell you that the adverse childhood experiences, the 10 that were initially identified, we know that there are much more than that. Why is it still happening? I think it is happening because people have not been trained. People have they don't really have the awareness of their own triggers and their own neuroanatomy. And so we are in a system where something occurs and adults are reacting to it. What I would like to see is ACEs, seclusion and restraint, trauma-informed practices. I'd like to see everything rolled into required college courses, and nobody should be able to get a teaching certificate if they are not aware of these practices taking place and that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm. Amen. When I try to think about kind of where are the points of failure, where are things that are going wrong, certainly there's a tremendous amount that we have to look at in terms of higher ed. People are getting out of teaching programs and other programs with no real idea of what it might be like in a classroom, what kind of behaviors, about basics of disability, about trauma. There's a change that needs to happen there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So when a first year teacher gets into a classroom, I think they're somewhat at the mercy of the environment that they're in. So if they go to a school where, and what we find with things like restraint seclusion, a lot of other punitive approaches, a lot of the behavioral approaches, is they vary from school to school, from district to district. And if you happen to start off in an environment where it's a very punitive environment and they're doing a lot of restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, that's how you are going to be imprinted as a teacher. That is what, I have this conversation and I had a conversation like this today with new educators, therapists, school psychologists, and others that end up in schools where this is happening, that begin to kind of push back, and then the system pushes back on them. Teachers that lose their jobs because they say, hey, this what we're doing here with this restraint seclusion, it's not what we should be doing. So it's tough. It's tough for somebody to stand up against the system and try to get it changed. And you mentioned your own story, like, the school that you worked at, and you're like, I don't work there anymore. And it probably wasn't well aligned with your thoughts and ideology. But man, is it tough if you're an educator and you begin in a place where these things are happening.
Yeah. And there's no accountability where things are occurring in the classroom and it's not being reported to administration, or it's happening with administration, it's not being reported to the district. In India, there are severe consequences. Your school can be fined. I read about a school in Japan that was shut down because of seclusion and restraint.
Mm-hmm.
And, as long as we are misreporting and underreporting, it's not going to change. There has to be a consequence when these things are occurring.
That's right. And I just happened to notice that our last comment came from a very special guest, Dr. Lori Descotels, who we've been talking about for the last hour and 20 minutes or so.
Yes.
And Lori weighed in and said, as a system, and I love, we've been doing a lot of these recently with people that have been in the Applied Educational Neuroscience program, and Lori just magically shows up, and I love that. But Lori says, as a system, we still see discipline as centering on the child. And that's a great point,
Mm-hmm.
And I think beyond that, it's, this even, I go so far as to say kind of the medical model of disability weighs in heavily here, where, there's a tendency to look at the child as broken, look at the child as needing fixing. And you kind of address that as well. You had a quote, and I don't have it in front of me now, but, it was kind of to that effect that, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. But that's how kids begin to feel. And that's a way that so many of our approaches are. So, I mean, that's a fantastic point, and great to see Lori jumping on. So I'm going to go, we're just about at time here, but I'm going to look through here real quick and see if you're okay, if we have another question or two.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's see what we have here. Jennifer, another good friend and ally, said mind shift. That's what really needs to happen. And also added that, a 1 hour PD on trauma is not trauma informed. I couldn't agree more. It's not a program. It's how we are.
Great. Yeah.
One of the points I always make about this is trauma informed is not just about the kids. It's about the entire environment. It's about the fabric of the school or organization. It's got to be reflected on how you're working with teachers and staff as well. You don't just be trauma informed to the kids you're working with. And I think you're right, Jennifer. Very often somebody, says, oh, we're trauma informed. Well, what's that mean? Well, we took a 3-hour certification,
And the question that I get is, well, if I'm trauma informed, how do I know if a student has trauma? Well, right. Even if you don't, you treat all students through a trauma informed lens.
Mm-hmm. Right. Let's see here. Another thing from Jennifer here, because people don't understand really what happens to the brain and what it really means to be an ACE and long-term potential. So just, I guess, commenting on kind of the ACEs idea. And we also have, a lot of comments here. A lot of people weighing in. Tricia says data does not tell a profound trauma impact on students and families, and that's absolutely correct. Angie had another great one here. Angie asked, is there any way to repair or replace murder cells? I assume not only ESL and trauma, puberty, and even ASD kids. All of these things can contribute to loss of murder cells. Any thought on that?
The great thing is the brain has so much plasticity that if those synapses are eaten away, we can create new ones. And that's why it's so important for us to make authentic connections with our kids and to affirm their identity so the brain is great because, like, if you think of a gratitude journal, if you write something that you're grateful for every day for 21 days, you've created a new pathway in your brain, right? The same thing happens with identity. If you can affirm our students' identity and continue to give them new information about themselves, about their environment, about feeling safe, that's going to create new pathways in the brain. So even if those murder cells, as we call them, even if they eat, and prune away way too many of the synapses than we like, we have that neuroplasticity. And I have not yet had the chance to read Dr. Lori's new book, Intentional Neuroplasticity, but I'm sure it speaks to the dynamics of the brain. I mean, just wonderful what the brain is capable of, that neurogenesis.
And I have a copy right here, and I'm gonna talk about this in a minute, but we're actually gonna be talking to Dr. Lori tomorrow. So this is gonna be great timing. Listen, we have gone actually past our time a little bit, and I want to be mindful of that. This has been fantastic, Robert. I really appreciate you coming on and even really tailoring what you're talking about towards the issues of restraint seclusion and what we're really focused on here. The work that you're doing is fantastic and meaningful, and it's really an honor to get to have you join us. And I always kind of say that one of my reasons for doing these live events, we've been doing them for almost 3 years, is the ability to have people like you on and to learn and to really be able to advocate for the better things we can and should be doing to support our kids, our teachers, and our staff. So I want to give you an opportunity if there's any final words you want to leave us with, but have so much gratitude for what you're doing and you're joining us today.
Oh, the honor is all mine, my friend. I'm so happy that you asked me to do this. And, I have my contact information in there. If anyone thinks of anything and wants to contact me, feel more than welcome.
Fantastic. And I'm going to have you stick around for a second here. Normally, this is the part of the day where I talk about what's coming up next. But because we've been talking about this all the way through today, and because you have a strong connection as well to Dr. Lori Destetels, mention that our next program is usually in 2 weeks, but we have a very special program tomorrow and it's tomorrow for a special reason. You had mentioned the new book from Dr. Lori, Intentional Neuroplasticity, which is a fantastic book. I had the honor and ability to read a early copy of the book, and it is fantastic. Of course, I would expect nothing less. Connections to Compliance is one of my all-time favorites for sure. This is fantastic work. So we have Dr. Lori joining us tomorrow, and tomorrow's a special day because the book is going on pre-order. So as of tomorrow, people will be able to pre-order the book. I think it's going to be shipping out in January. But in addition to Dr. Lori, we also have her daughter, Reagan, and her soon-to-be son-in-law, Reagan's fiance, Alexei. And Reagan and Alexei were the illustrators of the book. And if you have even seen the cover, you've probably seen it's fantastic. But there are so many amazing illustrations through the book. I think where you're able to kind of, and I'm just opened up at kind of at random here, but there's these amazing illustrations throughout the book that really bring it to life and have the feel of, this work that's being done. So really special event tomorrow. And Rob, if you're around, and we're going to be doing it around 3:30 again Eastern tomorrow afternoon. We'd love to have you join, but it'll always be available after the fact as well. But thank you so much again for joining us. And thank you everyone who joined us for this special event. And as always, we encourage you to share these presentations. These are really valuable to share with your, with your teachers, with your staff, with other people that are doing this work. I'll give one last shout out here from Dr. DeSales to Rob. Thank you, Rob, for leading the way. I learned from you. And absolutely fantastic. So thank you, Dr. Robert, thank you so much. I will let you go at this point, and we will see everybody else here tomorrow and again in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.